Well, it is finally official. The Liberal government will table the federal budget in early November, its first under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney. During question period today, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne said the budget will be introduced on November 4th. Now, by that date, it will have been almost 11 months since the government gave an economic update. That was the fall economic statement, which was completely overshadowed by the resignation of the finance minister who was supposed to present it, Chrystia Freeland. It will also be almost 19 months since the last federal budget was tabled. Now, November 4th is later than the government had initially indicated it would present its first budget, and today Champagne reiterated the government's plan for its fiscal future.
We're in the middle of global trade war. We need to make sure that we make smart investment, and the way to do that is that we say we're going to be rigorous in our expenses so we can be ambitious in our investments. So you want to spend less so you have more capital to invest.
Okay, the Power Panel is back to talk about this. Cameron Ahmad, Lisa Raitt, Cheryl Oates, and Emily Nicola. Lisa, it's been so long since we had a budget, I forget how to cover them. What do you make of the fact that they've had to push it into November? The impression was we might get it in the early part of October, but what are your thoughts on we're going to get some clarity on where things are?
I'm afraid it's because it's so hard to count that high in terms of deficit. Just to be facetious for a second. I was just literally looking to see on ChatGPT how many days since the last budget, which was April 16, 2024. Why I bring that up is that is going to be the talking point from the Conservatives, without a doubt, that we've gone this long without a budget. And as a result, we're going to be in the deficit situation that we're going to be in. I'm going to be looking for the trial balloons of how big this is going to be in terms of the deficit. I'm sure numbers will start floating around, but all of this to say, it's not just the federal deficit we have to be concerned about in a country. We have to be concerned about the total budget deficits we have right across, and that's all the provinces as well, because all of that together actually is what matters for investment in this country.
Yeah, it's been 506 days since the last budget, for those of you keeping track at home. Yeah. Cameron, that's a long time, when it's the same government. And I know there were reasons. We've had a busy year. But this is a long time between a formal fiscal update, especially with a tax cut, the NATO commitment, the sectoral supports, the trade war. And here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, it's been a long time, of course. And look, there are some valid reasons, like the election that happened, and the change in leadership and the change of prime minister. But of course, it's a long time. Of course, it's what the Conservatives will focus on. And I think it's a fair point for them to make. But as soon as budget that, November 4th date rolls around, what's really going to matter and what people are going to care about is how does this affect them day to day? And what does this mean for their ability to succeed, have a good job, save for their futures, et cetera. So that's what I'm sure the government is going to emphasize, what measures in the budget are going to affect people. They're already pre-positioning that times are tough and people should expect times to continue to be tough. But the other thing that I expect the government will try and emphasize is what position Canada is in relative to the rest of the world. Something that governments always do when they're presenting a budget, especially one with deficits. But Canada's not the only country right now that faces extremely difficult choices. Every single Western country, every NATO country has faced pressure to increase military spending. Military spending is an enormous commitment for any government to make, costs a lot of money, and certainly not hearing the Conservatives suggest that we reverse those spending commitments, nor am I hearing them suggest that we reverse the tax cut that the government introduced early on. So I think you can also expect the government to say, look, we are still in a relatively healthy fiscal position compared to most of our peers. And we're not the only country dealing with these tough choices, but here are the measures that are going to help with the things we were elected on doing, housing, affordability, and jobs.
Right. I mean, but where we are, Emily, is more exposed to the whims of the U.S. Economic agenda than any other country on earth. And, to Cameron's point, yes, they do the federal comparators on where we are compared to other countries, but when you add in subnational governments, it changes the calculation substantially, right? And already the messaging has been a substantial deficit, larger than last year, which was $50 to $60 billion. I mean, who knows where it ends? Your thoughts there?
Yeah, depending on where you are in the country, the provincial picture doesn't help people feel better. Here in Quebec, there's also a lot of cuts that are being done to healthcare and education, but I think it's a helpful reminder that our lives are just one, and that there is a feeling of austerity for many Canadians, both at the provincial and federal level, that are adding up to a way that creates anxiety. I've said this before, but I will say it again. When François-Philippe Champagne is saying that we will invest more and doing that by spending less, he's really just calling a rose sweet by another name. Spending and investing is the same thing. It's spending, and none of those things are revenues. And so what does he consider spending that is worthless, and what does he consider spending that is worthwhile, by which he means investing? That's what everybody wants to know. And so in terms of what is the cause of this delay, part of it might be that they're attaching big projects or big policy decisions to elements that are external to Canada, so the foreign diplomacy parts. And some of it might just be that there is a lot of resistance or discussions that still need to be had with the different departments so that things are done in a way that doesn't hurt too much politically and or in terms of actually hurting people. Sometimes when we talk about budget, we tend to talk about it in ideas, which is also important. But we do need to realize that those programs that are maybe going to be cut, they do impact real Canadians. It's real lives. It's not just political ping pong there. Yeah. And so if there is a delay in terms of making sure that we're not making cuts in things that are really going to be painful, I think it's worthwhile, but I do understand the impatience as well that a lot of people are going through. It's really uncanny that we have no budget and also have practically no bills passed in this country for the last, God knows how many years, because Parliament was so dysfunctional and we hardly notice.
Yes, well, yes. I mean, you make an interesting point there. But, you know, Cheryl, we will on November 4th get the mathematical explanation of what spend less to invest more means. You know, we've heard from Minister Champagne. You look at, for example, the Build Canada Homes announcement on Sunday, $13 billion that will go in to help build homes and create assets. They consider that investment. I take Emily's point that spending is spending, but, you know, it's not expansion of entitlement programs. It's not expansion of civil bureaucracy. It is more things aimed at growth and development. We'll see if it stands the test. I mean, what are your thoughts as we get closer to the revelation of this?
Yeah, I mean, there has been so many words thrown around. There has been expectations set, I would say pretty high. It's pretty tough to have an austerity budget, an investment budget, and a growth budget all at the same time. So, you know, here's where we get to see what does Mark Carney, the banker, look like as Mark Carney, the politician, introducing a budget. And I think, you know, the budget's delayed. Yes, we haven't had a budget now for a very long time in Canada. We expected it in October. Now it's going to come in November, and nobody will remember, other than the opposition, that the budget was delayed. What really matters is when all of this stuff is introduced, do real people in normal lives, not embedded in politics, do they feel something in their life change? Do their bills get cheaper? Do they feel like Canada's defense is stronger? Do they have access to homes, or do they have access to good jobs? That is what matters, you know, come the next election time when people decide whether this budget was a good budget. It's not whether it was early or late or whether Mark Carney lived up to his rhetoric. It's whether it actually matters to the people who are continually voting for him. So, but, you know, Lisa, given all of the things happening in this moment with the disruption from the U.S. and the assault on those core sectors, the need to commit more and more and more of your public financial capital to defense spending over the next decade, is there room to do something in a budget that fundamentally changes the discomfort people are feeling? Because it seems like there's a lot of emergency room medicine going on in terms of, you know, financial planning.
Well, long-term economic development is a tough thing to sell because everyone's so focused on short-termism because they want to see the impact right away. And that's the political dilemma. But I would also like to, I think it's worth remembering that Mr. Carney said a long time ago that the budget is going to be divided out a bit differently into like an operating budget and a capital budget. Yep. So the numbers aren't going to be comparable to past numbers. The deficit may show up being actually smaller than last year because they've removed a lot of the capital side into another line item. So there'll be a little bit of jiggery-pokery going on in terms of trying to figure out the true number at the end of the day. Yeah, now I did ask about that specific point during the campaign when this promise came up. And I was told that, yes, they will divide the spending into operations capital, but there will be one deficit number that you
you can still compare to the old one. So we'll see. There are no facts in the future, so we'll see what November 4th shows. But Cameron, I think it would be. I think it would be politically troubling if they tried to do jiggery-pokery, to use the technical term that Lisa threw in there. You're going to want to see, I think they're going to do this division to kind of show where their priorities are. I mean, that's the way I see it, that what they think is what they need to do to drive the economy. I don't know. What's your sense?
Yeah, I agree. And I think Lisa said very, very rightly that selling long-term investment and economic growth is difficult to do, especially in this day and age. And especially when you're in a minority position where you have to fend off attacks from the opposition constantly. And their most salient or their most compelling attacks are going to be related to what people feel in the here and now. So I think, other than talking about the deficit, so I think it's in their interest, and it's likely what the Prime Minister will do is to try and demonstrate how, in line with what he campaigned on, this budget is part of the building block that will put Canada on a more secure and solid path in all of the turmoil that we face. And I also think there is a difference between spending and investment. I mean, you can invest in generational programs like childcare, which over the long term, and if you look at other jurisdictions that did it, actually prove that there's a huge economic return for future generations, for current and future generations. Those cost an enormous amount of money, but they're also really good for the economy long term. Then there are other programs that you can spend on which have a much lower economic return for the health of the economy long term, like tax cuts sometimes. So there's an enormous amount on this government's plate, but I think they're going to try and frame it all within the lens of positioning Canada to be successful in this chaotic global situation that we face, but also helping people right now with the affordability issues that they face, also what they were elected to deliver on.
Right. Well, Emily, there have been about 4 tax cuts, I think, since Mark Carney became Prime Minister, right? The carbon tax, the digital services tax, the capital gains, the inclusion tax rate, and basic income tax have all been cut. It seems to me that on the investment side, it's going to be less of like a childcare program and just straight industrial policy targeted measures to try to jolt the private sector and unlock private sector capital.
It seems like this is the case, and I think it's important to speak to those tax cuts that have been made. They've been done provincially as well. There's been this. They're really helpful to get elected. When Lisa was speaking in terms of short-term benefit, that's clearly one of those examples, and that's a lot of the time just a few months afterwards people don't necessarily remember that they were there. And when it comes to deficit, we talk about cuts of programming, but I think the fact that there's not even a political conversation about increasing revenues for Canada speaks as well to the political hegemonies that are surrounding us. The fact that it was so hard to consider a little bit more of a tax on the wealthier elements in Canada, that it was essentially politically too difficult to go through, that we had to backtrack on that, speaks a lot to the ways in which sometimes we have deficits just because there is people who could contribute more who absolutely do not do it. And I wish that was a taboo that we were able to break, because at the end of the day, when it comes to things that are considered spending, a lot of it tends historically to impact more vulnerable Canadians. And then on the other hand, when it comes to increasing a level of tax on the more wealthy elements of this country, there is absolutely no way that this seems to be feasible. But cutting on the people who are more vulnerable, somehow always feasible. And so I want us to keep that in mind in terms of what's going to be coming forward, and because it's going to be revealing in terms of where Mark Carney actually stands.
Right. Well, Charles, I think, and you'll get the final word, it seems to me that a government that wants to unleash capital would find it difficult to bring in a tax on capital gains, right, and increase it. Certainly, that's my understanding of their thinking, whatever you think of it. But the challenge on this budget to try to do this in difficult times, it has to be bundled with a message of hope and optimism for Canadians, right? Like in your selling point. I mean, what do you expect to hear from Minister Champagne?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've done a good job so far in the pieces that we've seen, having really tangible things that Canadians can point to that tie directly back to the things that they care about right now. For example, when we look at the housing plan, yes, housing is inaccessible and expensive in Canada. Being able to say something tangible like 4,000 homes at a time. That's something people can hold on to. That's something they can picture. That's something they can understand. When you just say, we are going to make homes more accessible, that means nothing to most people in Canada.
Right.
So if they can continue to roll out their budget programs with tangible deliverables for Canadians about what they care about, they will be just fine. And then the question will also be, when we talk about austerity and cuts, will we know where those cuts are? Or is that something we'll have to find ourselves as well?
Yes, well, we have a conversation about that coming up with the Public Service Alliance of Canada in just a little bit here on the show, because they've got some deep concerns. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for being here early and staying here late. Cameron Ahmad, Lisa Ray, Cheryl Oates, and Emily Nicola. Thanks so much, gang.